happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. It is the top of the hour, 5 o'clock on the Gulf Coast, which means 4 o'clock in the mountains, 6 o'clock on the East Coast, and 3 on the West. There is one place that you need to be right now, and you are there. My name is Dr. Randy Fink, and this is Fertility with Fink. Thank you so much for being here, as we are every Tuesday evening. At this time, we get together and talk about all those things that are important. I am here tonight in Pensacola, Florida, where it is a wonderful and very chilly. I think it's probably in the 50-ish degrees tonight. It was pretty cold this morning when I got up. But a happy spring break to everybody. There are parts of the country where it is definitely warmer than it is on the Florida Gulf Coast tonight. But it is spring break, so that means happy times for everyone. School's out. People are loving life. It's beach time. It's happy time. It's play time. And so I hope you are sure enjoying your week so far. How's it going? I am a fertility gynecologist here at New Life Fertility in Pensacola, Florida. We also have offices in Mobile, Alabama, and Panama City. I also work with the Missouri Center for Reproductive Medicine in St. Louis, Chesterfield to be precise, and Tulsa as well, where I was last week. We were live from Tulsa last week and had a great time with all my colleagues from there and seeing the great patients in the Tulsa metropolitan area. So let's say hello to, Finkity is here. Hello, Finkity. I am your biggest fan. And yes, you may have my autograph. It would be my pleasure. And that's my daughter, just in case anybody wants to know. She can have all the autographs she wants. How about that? Hi, Mrs. C.R. Tyler. You are the first to join tonight here on Instagram. Thank you for being with me. We've got a couple of different feeds here. We've got 2 Instagram feeds. This is Randy Fink, MD, and this is New Life Fertility here. We also have a couple of Facebook feeds for New Life and MCRM. We've got a couple of YouTubes. We've got First Fertility, and we've got LinkedIn. We are part of the world-renowned First Fertility Network, and so take a look at firstfertility.com and see about what we can do for you folks. Sheila, hello there. Tony 2000. I like the name there. Eunuch is what that looks like. Dragon Meyer. Hello, Marlena. Nice to see you this evening. Into Pinot Journey. Always a pleasure. Hey, Clark, Angela, nice to see you. Thank you for being here. S. Atkinson, hello and good evening. Amber in Gulf Shores, howdy. Thank you for joining over here on the New Live side, and for all those who are there on Facebook. It doesn't tell me your name, but I can see that you're there, and I appreciate you being there. Hey, folks, if you've got questions tonight about this fertility journey, or about women's health, or about pregnancy, or about any of those things as it comes to making a family, that's what we're here for. Throw your questions my way. If we can't get to them during the program, then I will happily ask you to please email me at askfertilitywithfink@firstfertility.com, and we'll get those at the top of the show next time. Hello, Tracy in Miami. Thank you to the Castle family for being here. Shabnam, hello, and good evening to you. So, what are you doing here for St. Patty's Day? I almost forgot to wear green today, but fortunately I was able to come up with a little something, because that is a very important thing, because you know what happens if you don't wear green, then you get pinched, and not interested in getting pinched. So I am wearing of the green. I've always thought it was a little, so I did, I went out for lunch today with my family, and one of the popular things to serve with food of this region is things like a hush puppy. And the hush puppies had been dyed green, and so I must say it was a strange experience. But I think it's really strange how, in Chicago, they dump all that green dye into the water and turn the river green. I'm like, well, that has to be healthy and good for the environment as well. I'm sure it's biodegradable and it just goes away and doesn't do anything. I'm sure they've looked into that, but really just the thought of it kind of makes me a little want to turn green. So, hey. Hey, Aaron, thank you for joining this evening. Sid France, howdy. And Sarah, hi there. How are you this evening? I want to take a moment to address a couple of questions that came in last week, and it had again to do. I've been getting a bunch of questions about semen analysis, about the sperm test that we do, and some of the kinds of dilemmas that we run into as far as male factor infertility goes. And it's kind of curious that I'm getting these questions. They tend to be emailed more than they are asked live, and I don't know if that's because it's more women who are watching this broadcast, or because the guys are just don't want to ask the question. But it is a perfectly safe place for you to talk about anything you want to, so feel free. But let's review just kind of a couple of things. What do we look at when we're looking at a semen analysis? We are looking at, first thing we look at is the sperm count. Now, the actual count of sperm is not as important as what we call the TMC, or the total motile count of sperm. Motile means swimming. So it's not just the number of sperm that are seen under the slide. It's actually it's kind of an equation. It's a math equation. You take the volume of sperm, you take the concentration, that is the number of sperm that are seen in the sample, and then you multiply that by the percentage that are swimming. So we're looking for anything more than about 42% to be swimming. And a sperm concentration. Well, ultimately, really what we're looking for is a total motile count of greater than 20 million. That's what I would consider to be normal. And you say, oh, 20 million, gosh, that's an awful lot of sperm. Well, yeah, it is. I mean, sometimes we'll see a semen analysis with, 400 million sperm in it. But, we are pretty, the word I use is inefficient at the way we reproduce. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it only takes one sperm to get the job done. One sperm on target means one sperm meeting an egg, and that should be the end of the story. Right? But in order to reliably put one sperm on the target, we really need 20 million sperm. Why is that? Well, gosh, if you think of it, only 42% of the sperm swimming is what we consider to be normal. So that means, really roughly almost, 58%, almost 60% of the sperm not swimming is continued to be normal. Is considered to be, that is a normal thing. If we look at the morphology of the sperm, and morphology means somebody's job is to look under a microscope at sperm. Sperm have a head, they have a neck, they have a tail. And so somebody's job is to say, well, what percentage of those sperm are normal? 96% of sperm can be abnormal, and that's normal. So having 4% normal forms is really all I would expect when it comes to a semen analysis. So those are a couple of reasons why we need so many sperm to reliably put that one sperm on target. I'd like to talk a little bit more about something that's called DNA fragmentation. DNA fragmentation. So what is really a sperm? A sperm is, it's a little package of DNA that has a motor on it, right? And that motor moves the sperm along. Well, there's a couple of different ways that we can assess how that's working. And so as we get a little more granular into what a semen analysis actually tests for, one of the things we look for is called a forward progression score, a forward progression score. And that's arbitrated based on four numbers: number 1, number 2, number 3, or number 4. So a 4 means most of those sperm seem to be purposefully going from point A to point B, that it can get from being inside the vagina, swim through the cervix, up through the uterine cavity, into the fallopian tube, and find an egg. That's what we expect with a forward progression score of 4. A 3 means, almost there, but a few, less that are actually going all the way and getting from point A to point B. But when you get to a progression score of 1 and 2, it means that more of those sperm are just twitching, or they're swimming in circles, or don't appear to be going in some purposeful movement, which is trying to get them from their place of origin all the way to meet and ultimately fertilize an egg. So when we see these kinds of things, we start thinking about, does it make sense to test for DNA fragmentation? And DNA is, of course, the genetic material that's in the sperm. And what can happen is that sometimes that DNA, which is nice, tightly round, if you remember anything about science class, it's called a double helix. If that DNA starts to unwind and starts to come apart, that's what we call DNA fragmentation. And fragmented DNA means that that sperm is not going to be able to knock on the door and fertilize that egg. It's not going to be able to get inside to fertilize the egg. So a couple of ways that we can tell that are based on those forward progression scores of 1 or 2, even in an otherwise normal semen analysis, suggests to me that that sperm is probably not going to work inside the body. So doing something like timed intercourse, or even an IUI, an intrauterine insemination, is likely to not be successful in that scenario. We can carry that a step further and do the test for DNA fragmentation, and that gives us back a number. That number is anywhere between, 1 and probably about 80, I think. If the number is above a 20, that means that the capacity of the sperm to be able to fertilize an egg inside the body is going to be dramatically decreased. And that's one of the ways that we understand and that we know that some people will not do well with something like insemination or with timed intercourse. Instead, their better choice is going to be IVF. So that's something that we look at, and we look at that really with every semen analysis, because what we want ultimately is for you to have a baby. We would love for you to be able to have a baby in the easiest way possible, but at the same time, we don't want you spinning your wheels and frankly spending your money doing treatments that will not be effective. Now, it's not that they can't ever be effective, but when we see these numbers pretty reliably, it means that the sperm don't work inside the body. Could they? Well, I suppose it's possible, but in my experience, generally, when we see that and make that recommendation, it's usually because it's not something that's going to work. So that's what we look for. A couple of things that we look for beyond the obvious in a semen analysis. And so now you know the secrets your doctor didn't want to tell you. So there we have it. Haley and the Stiles family. Good evening. And another Haley. The other Haley is here. How? That's wonderful. Jody Hoffman, my dear friend in Missouri, is here tonight, as is Sarah. And the Bam Gal and husband in Mobile. That's my mom and dad in Mobile, Alabama. We'll be seeing you a little bit later. Let's see. Got a couple of questions here. This comes from Carly. Carly says, my medicated cycle was unfortunately canceled due to stalled lining following suppression. I'm going to do into a modified natural, just finished some Provera, odds that this one works out better for me. So what she's talking about there is that she had some suppression, either some Orilissa or some Lupron for endometriosis, or for the marker called BCL6, which is a marker of endometriosis. And so what do? We can turn that inflammatory and anti-hormone effect off by using those medications. And when we do that, Usually do that for 60 days. Sometimes the body is a little bit slow to respond. So Carly was going into a frozen embryo transfer cycle, but it sounds like her lining did not grow thick enough. And yeah, that does happen sometimes. And so what you're going to do there, Carly, it sounds like you're going to shift gears and do something in a with a natural cycle or a modified natural, which means that you're going to make your own estrogen. You're going to get some ovulation induction, and you're going to make your own estrogen, which is going to stimulate your lining to grow. Many times when the body makes its own estrogen, it does just fine. Or sometimes it even takes a, it may just be a little bit of time. It may be the tincture of the fact that, well, you started out with this medicated cycle, didn't work, but given enough time, that lining may just kind of reset itself. You did some Provera. And so if that gives you a period, then that tells me that, well, you did actually have enough estrogen in your body. And what it means is that your body's going to mow the grass, you're going to get a period, and you're going to start out fresh from scratch. So, yep, I think odds are in your favor that things are going to work out. There are some other things that we can do for folks when their lining doesn't want to cooperate with us, when that lining doesn't want to grow. We can use, sometimes we'll use a patch instead of a pill for estrogen. We can use, there's an injectable form of estrogen that's called estrogen that you inject every other day. And that does a wonderful job. What else? Some Viagra can help. Some baby aspirin can help. They both increase the blood flow. There is a supplement that's known as L-arginine. I recommend that one as well. And there's also intrauterine PRP, or platelet-rich plasma, that we can place inside. All those things will help you grow a lining. Fortunately, in most cases, when folks have been on suppression and they just don't grow a lining right away afterwards, it just takes a little bit of time for all those receptors to reset and for that lining to be able to grow. So, Carly, I am optimistic for you, and I think that is going to work out fine. Our fingers are crossed here, my friends. Ms. C.R. Tyler said someone posted that their embryologist gave her immature eggs a day in the lab to see if they mature, and a decent number actually did. Most made it to blast. Have you seen this before? Yes. So that's called in vitro maturation. In vitro maturation. And so what happens in most cases is that if you have an immature egg, and that means one that comes from your body and it's just not quite of a mature size yet. They can tell by looking at some of the structures in it. We call that an M1 as opposed to an M2. An M2 is one that has gone through both phases of growth, or meiosis, if you remember that term from high school. An M1 has gone through the first stage, but not the second. And that's what we think of as an immature egg. If all of your eggs are immature, then they will hold, typically most labs will hold those eggs and look at them the next day to see what has matured. And many of them will. Most of the time, if you have a cohort of eggs, let's say that you have 8 mature eggs that came from your ovaries and 2 of them look immature, they'll usually do the ICSI, that is to place the sperm inside that egg, on day 1. And typically will not ICSI those other 2 immature eggs, even if they mature on the next day, because you have such a large cohort of otherwise normal mature eggs. And the reason for that is that those less mature eggs that go through in vitro maturation may not be of the same quality as the regular eggs. Now, if you have no normal eggs, no mature eggs, that they're all M1s, then typically what an embryologist would do would be to hold those eggs, to let them keep trying to mature and look at them the next day, and then fertilize them if they become mature. And just like in your friend's case there, yeah, there are a lot of babies that come from that scenario. So pretty cool stuff, right? Embryology is very cool. If you've never spent any time with an embryologist, and why would you? It's actually kind of a fun thing to talk about. It's fun to watch their videos, and it's fun to just sort of see how we start as just a few little cells, and how we really grow to develop, and how all that happens in the laboratory. Really fascinating stuff there. Emily is here. Good evening, Emily. Emily says, I've had and on the Facebook side, I've had two IVF tries with donor eggs. Both times the embryos stuck, started growing, and about 2 weeks later stopped growing. Low HCG both times and declining after 2 weeks. My doctor said it could be my endometrium or my age. I'm 50. I really think the embryos were no good, and thinking to come to the US and start again with a new donor. Your opinion is important, as I've been following you for a few months, and I trust you. Well, thank you, Emily. I appreciate your trust. That means the world here. So there's a couple of things I think that come into play. In most cases, well, really what you're describing there, Emily, is what's known as a biochemical pregnancy. And that is that you get a positive pregnancy test and the number starts to go up, but then it starts to go back down again. In some cases, people will get a positive pregnancy test, maybe even at home, and then a few days later or a week later, they'll actually get a period. The period just kind of comes. So without actually following the levels. So a biochemical pregnancy is different from what we know of as a clinical pregnancy, biochemical versus a clinical pregnancy, because in a clinical pregnancy, we can do an ultrasound, we can look and we can see that pregnancy inside the uterus. When we look and we see a heartbeat, we know that 95% of those pregnancies continue on without having a problem. So that's really the best odds we could hope for, is to be able to look and see a heartbeat. In most cases, a biochemical pregnancy is presumed to be an embryo problem. It's presumed to be a genetic issue with the embryo itself. Now, that said, you're paying a lot of money for your donor eggs, and donor eggs typically come from very young women whose DNA is stable, and they should have a very high incidence of being able to create a nice chromosomally normal embryo. So the presumption is embryos that arise from a donor egg are most probably going to be normal, but they're not always. They're just not. And so testing your embryos for chromosomes is one option, doing PGT testing. And, you know, Emily, if you came to my office, I would say, well, gosh, I don't just want to take for granted that, yeah, it's probably an embryo problem. I would really want to dig deeper. And there are some tests that I would want to do. I would want to test for something like endometriosis. I would want to test for, certain other things that can impede in implantation, things in the immune system that could be caused there. Now, at 50, we know that even though the uterus does not age at the same rate that the ovaries do, still the incidence of ongoing pregnancy is going to be lower the older we are. So sometimes what I would do in that scenario is really just cycle you for a couple of months with some estrogen and some progesterone, just to make sure that your uterine lining is used to being thickened up like that in order to be able to achieve a pregnancy. So I certainly, Emily, would not blow that off because, you went through a lot to make those embryos. So I certainly would not just assume that, it's probably an embryo problem. Now, at the end of the day, realistically, it probably is an embryo problem, but you don't just want to assume that. You want to look under those stones. You want to look behind every corner just to make sure we're not missing anything else, so that we're going to give your body the very best chance to implant those embryos. Vanessa asks, can you explain what ICSI is? I have seen many talks about this. Yes, indeed. ICSI is intracytoplasmic sperm injection. So when we do IVF, there's two ways that we can do this. So we rev up the ovaries, we get eggs from the woman. Those eggs are retrieved from the ovaries and go to the lab. We have sperm there, whether it came from partner, whether it came from donor. We have egg and sperm. So now, two things we can do. One is you can dump them all into a dish and sit there and watch them and hope that the sperm does what it's supposed to do, which is to fertilize the egg. Sperm are supposed to bind to that egg, and they're supposed to penetrate the little shell, and they're supposed to get inside and do their thing. That's how an egg gets fertilized. That's how we were all made when we were made. That's called conventional IVF. Conventional IVF, as opposed to ICSI, which is where we can use some different methodologies in order to select what appears to be the very best and the strongest of the sperm, individually select a sperm for each egg, and then take that sperm and place it inside the egg. And that's what ICSI is. Now, why would you do one from the other? Well, when ICSI was first invented, this probably goes back to I'm going to say probably the 90s. IVF kind of started in the 80s. ICSI came along, and initially it was really just intended for people who had pretty significant male factor problems, like somebody needed to select an individual sperm for the egg. Initially, there was some thought that, well, we don't really know what happens with these embryos. Could it be damaging the embryo? Could it be, helping to make some sort of abnormality in an embryo when we place that sperm inside? As it turns out, the answer is no. No, it really doesn't. It's absolutely a safe thing to do. Insofar as our understanding. But the American Society for Reproductive Medicine says ICSI should not be the standard of care, that ICSI should be reserved for cases when it's necessary. Now, that said, almost all practices in the United States use ICSI as their standard of care. And why is that? Well, put aside, the question about, research and science and so forth. When most people are doing IVF, they're paying a lot of money for it, or their insurance is. When you do conventional IVF and you place that sperm on the egg and hope that the sperm will fertilize the egg, if it doesn't, like if there's a male factor that you may not have been able to identify previously, and you don't know about it until you put the sperm on the egg and then go to look at it the next day and find that nothing fertilized, then you have to do what's called rescue ICSI. And that's then when they'll take that individual sperm and place it inside. But when you do that, the outcomes are really very poor. The pregnancy rates from that are unfortunately really very, very low. So when people are heavily invested in their IVF cycles, and even if your insurance is covering it, still there's a huge emotional investment there. Most practices feel that we want to be able to do everything we can to maximize the odds of giving you a baby. And that means taking that sperm and putting it on the inside. Now, there are some programs that will still offer conventional IVF, but will charge you extra money if you want to be ICSI'd. And that's not the way we do things, and I don't particularly agree with that for a number of reasons. But that's the difference between ICSI and conventional IVF, and why most programs will ICSI. Now, occasionally, I'll meet somebody who has read something on the internet, and they'll say, "I have done my research," and I say, "You've done your research," and by research you mean you did a Google search, right? And they read something somewhere that says, "Oh, you should not ICSI. Oh gosh, that's messing with fire. That's playing with things that you shouldn't play with." And they come in and they say, "I'm going to tie your hands, and I demand that you do conventional IVF instead of what you would normally do." And we'll say, "Okay, that's your choice, but you have to understand, there's probably not a real rational explanation to do that. And if you do, then you get what you get, because you asked us to do it. The explanation that some people have for conventional IVF is to say, well, if we let the sperm fertilize the egg itself, then naturally the strongest sperm is going to be the one to get there. So it must lower the risk to the pregnancy or for miscarriage or something like that, right? No, no, it really doesn't. It's a good thought, but it doesn't actually work out that way. So that's the difference there between ICSI and conventional IVF. Hey, folks, guess what? We're halfway through the program here at the bottom of the hour, and this is the time when I like to do what I call the 5:30 fuzzies with Fink. And what this is about is where I just kind of feel like this whole fertility thing and this whole business about getting pregnant and adding to our families and it's just so stressful, and there's so much that goes into it. It is a potentially very uncomfortable emotional roller coaster. I think that most of the people who watch this program are the kind of people who would do anything for others around them, for folks in need, when people needed a little extra support or needed a hand on their shoulder just to know that they're not alone. Most of you guys would do that for everybody else on here because you've been through it. And you know what? It's not just fertility, it's the world around us. Maybe it's a family crisis. Maybe it's a relationship issue with a spouse or a partner. Maybe it's something that's going on at work or at school that's creating extra stress on our lives. It is way too easy for us to feel alone. And the point of the 5:30 fuzzies with Fink is so that we can all stand together as one community with all our frailties together, because we're really pretty much all one and the same, with all of our hopes and all of our dreams together, because those hopes and dreams are really shockingly similar. And really, with all our heart and all our soul, to give to someone else just so that they know that when they're having a crisis, that they're not alone. So if you're out there tonight and you are in that crisis chair, you're not alone, friends. And if you're sitting with me here for the fuzzies with Fink at 5:30, let's break the internet with kindness. Let's send out so many good vibes. Let's send out so many hugs and kisses and pats on the back and attaboys, and you can do this, because you can do this. No matter what you're going through, you're not alone. We are all here for you. And as I am fond of saying at the end of my program, tomorrow is a new day, and it's full of all new adventures. So every step forward with hope. Send those vibes, friends. That is the Fuzzies with Fink. Thank you for being a part of that. Let's jump back into our questions here. Let's see. Angela says, why don't they check for DNA fragmentation for good sperm to ICSI the egg? Isn't that important? Do any IVF clinics offer this? Well, really, every IVF clinic offers the ability to test DNA fragmentation. But guess what the cure is for DNA fragmentation? It's ICSI. Isn't that funny? We were just talking about ICSI. So if you have highly fragmented sperm, there's two things we do. First of all, I tell the guy, I want you to increase the frequency of ejaculation. And sometimes I'll send a note home that says, please ejaculate daily leading up to, and they're like, what? I've never gotten homework like this before. And the woman's like, wait, I have to have how many shots a day? And all this guy has to do is ejaculate. It ain't right. And it's not, but there's a reason that women carry the pregnancies in our as humans. And that is because if it were up to the guys, oh my God, it would never happen. The guys are just big babies. Women have the strength to be able to do it when guys really no way. So hats off. But in any event, um, the increasing the frequency of ejaculation will decrease the sperm count, but it will improve the sperm quality. So what we do is we say, all right, let's say that your retrieval is going to end up being on a Friday. Well, on Wednesday, I want you to ejaculate. On Thursday, I want you to ejaculate. And then on Friday, you're going to ejaculate for the specimen for our IVF. We should, in theory, by doing that alone, have less DNA fragmented sperm. But then we put that sperm through an obstacle course. So that they have to run through this obstacle course and the best sperm come out on the other side. And that creates a smaller pool, theoretically, a pool of better sperm that the embryologist can look at to select each individual sperm for egg. And that's kind of how that works. So there you go. That's a great question, Angela. Thank you for that. E Winnick says, or you and you Nick. Oh, you Nick. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I got it. Thoughts on letrozole added in combination with Lupron for suppression. So when one has endometriosis, we will put you on either Lupron or Oralissa, or there's another one called Myfembry. But Lupron basically takes the plug and pulls it out of the wall. It turns off the brain telling the body to make hormones, the brain telling the ovaries to make hormone. So it shuts down that hormonal supply. It basically puts you into a temporary menopause. Oralissa and Myfembry do the same thing, but a little bit more selectively, not as much of a big hammer clomping you on the head. They do just as good a job, but with really some fewer side effects. And that's why, those medicines have kind of come a long way, and it's orally delivered. And, it's a pill that you take daily instead of getting a shot, every month or once every 3 months, which you do with the Lupron. Well, so Lupron, or the pill, is telling the brain to tell the ovaries to quit making hormone. But guess what? You still make some hormone. Where is that hormone made? That hormone is made in fat cells. We all have fat cells. Doesn't matter how skinny you are or how not skinny you are. We all have fat cells in our body. Nothing to be ashamed of. These fat cells convert our testosterone into estrogen. And so letrozole stops the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. So with Lupron, you're telling the brain, quit making that hormone. It tells the ovaries, quit making it, but you're still getting some. You're still getting some from what we call the peripheral conversion, or the conversion in those fat cells of testosterone into estrogen. When you take the letrozole, it stops that peripheral conversion. And there is some evidence that shows that there might be a little bit higher of an outcome when adding an aromatase inhibitor, which is the letrozole, and stopping that conversion of testosterone to estrogen in the fat cells. It's very small. It's a small difference. There are some clinicians who say, hey man, I'm going to go all the way. If we're going to do this, we're going to shut it all down, because I don't want to leave anything to chance. We want to give your embryo the very best shot by completely shutting down the food supply to your endometriosis, and that's estrogen. So therefore, you use the systemic one and you use the letrozole for what's happening in the fat cells. I do that sometimes. In my personal opinion, I don't, it adds to side effects to make someone really completely hypoestrogenic, even for a short period of time. I don't feel that the evidence is overwhelming that adding letrozole to Lupron dramatically improves the outcomes. So unless it's someone who I know has a very significant clinical case of endometriosis, personally, I don't usually do that. There are some people that do. There are different people who have different opinions on that, and there really is no one right or wrong answer there. Either one is the the right answer, or frankly, either one is the wrong answer. so, so either way, but that's the reasoning behind it, and it really just kind of depends on the doctor's preference, and hopefully that decision is made sort of in consultation with you, so that it's a shared decision making model. So I would talk about the risks and the benefits. The risk is, well, you feel a little worse because you're really not making any estrogen at all. You may have more hot flashes or leg cramps or vaginal dryness or any of that stuff. But for what gain, it really kind of depends on, well, what sort of embryo do you have? And, I think we can usually kind of quote you a number that may be able to help you make a decision. But in my book, I don't typically do it unless I know someone's had surgery before. We know they've got bad clinical endometriosis, and we're really trying to shut that off, not just to shut down the BCL6 marker. Now, again, that's just my opinion. Let's see here. What else we got going on? What's the difference between a day 5, 6, and 7 embryo if they are all euploid? Hi, Bree. Thank you. Good evening. But that question came from Vanessa, and it's a very good question. So the truth there is that a day 5 embryo and a day 6 embryo typically perform pretty similarly. They perform about the same. A day 5 embryo blastocyst is always going to be a little bit better. A day 6 embryo, that means that it took basically 6 days to become a day 5 embryo. Does that make sense? So when that happens, that means that, well, maybe it's growing a little bit more slowly. Maybe it's not quite as normal as that day 5 blast. There is a little bit of difference, but not a lot. There is, however, a big difference between a day 5 and a day 6 embryo, and let's say a day 7 embryo. Now, if you've got a euploid embryo, one that is chromosomally normal, and it's a day 7 embryo, that's still a good embryo, friends. I would say don't dispose of that embryo. Don't get rid of it. I mean, that is a good embryo that very, very much can get you a pregnancy. And I can't tell you the number of babies I have held in my arms that come from a day 7 embryo. So again, not a throwaway, but statistically, a euploid embryo is the best kind of embryo we can hope for. And that is one that is said to be chromosomally normal from the biopsy that we did. And at least the biopsy that we did, that biopsy, those cells come from the part that becomes the placenta. It doesn't actually come from the baby parts themselves. But to the best of our understanding, that's a normal embryo, which is a great thing. If you have the choice of transferring a day 5 blast that's euploid versus a day 7 blast that's euploid, you would say that the day 5 statistically is going to do better than the day 7, because that one took 7 days to become a day 5 embryo. So it may be chromosomally normal, but it was growing slower than the other embryos in that group. So as a result, it may just not do as well. So having a euploid embryo, honestly, kind of trumps everything. That's the best we can hope for. And our success rate is still going to be higher with a euploid embryo than anything else, even if it's a day 7 embryo. Now, usually you wouldn't choose to transfer your day 7 embryo as the first one because, again, it's going to have a little lower chance of sticking compared to the day 5. And that really is the difference there. Let's see, Shelby joined. Howdy, Shelby. Thank you for being here on the Instagram side there. Nurtured Shanna. Oh, my goodness, I haven't seen you for a while. Let's see. Actually, one other thing from Carly. I was on all of that and did the PRP. It didn't work. We were talking about getting you the uterine lining. I think that just means that you need a little bit of time. If you were fine before and did suppression and now you have a uterine lining issue, that is something that you can expect to be temporary. There's nothing I would expect to be permanent as a result of your suppression. All right, Shanna, good to see you again. I recently, Shanna says, had a 50% uterine septum repaired that had been missed in multiple previous hysteroscopies. That's interesting. Can you help me understand how do these get missed, and how does this explain recurrent pregnancy loss? Interesting. Well, so a uterine septum is a band of muscle that runs down the middle of the uterus. And so if you think of the uterus as, sort of being, let's call it something like this, and of course it doesn't really look like that, but let's say that it looks like this band of muscle is running down here. And so what happens is that the lining of the uterus that tries to implant on that muscle is not the same as the lining of the uterus that's in the rest of the cavity. So theoretically, if a pregnancy tries to implant on that septum, that muscular band, then it can increase the risk of pregnancy loss. Now, they've studied this and they found that, well, we used to think, gosh, if we look and we find a septum, oh my gosh, that's something we have to treat. Yes, we have to treat that surgically right away. You don't want that septum there. That may cause you to have a miscarriage. Well, the current evidence is that you really don't have to be so aggressive with them, because every septum is not associated with recurrent pregnancy loss. Now, if you've had recurrent pregnancy loss and you have a septum, I'd say, yeah, man, we want to get rid of that septum, because it's pretty straightforward surgically to treat, because the band of muscle kind of sits here like this. We basically come in with a camera and just kind of go snip, 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 and this band of muscle just falls away. It becomes right back into the top part of the uterus. So surgically, in the right hands, it's a pretty straightforward, easy thing to treat. And all of us in the infertility world have treated that 1,000 times or more. So it's easy to do. But how can it get missed? Well, there is another type of uterus that's called a bicornuate uterus. And a bicornuate uterus looks almost like a little Valentine's heart. There are two cornua, or two horns, to this uterus. There's an opening to a fallopian tube up here, and there's an opening to a fallopian tube up there, but there's this little band that's coming down the middle. You can look at a uterus, and it's really hard to tell from looking at it whether it's bicornuate, which is a normal variant, or whether it is a septate uterus, which means it's round all the way across the top here, but there's this band of muscle in it. So how do we tell that? Well, really, quite honestly, the best way to tell is by MRI. If you have an MRI can easily see through all that muscle and can make an assessment of what's the actual shape of that uterus. Is that a band of muscle, or is it just kind of part of what is otherwise a bicornuate uterus? It's a harder thing to tell by ultrasound. You could tell sometimes if you had a simultaneous laparoscopy with a hysteroscopy. Most people don't do that. And sometimes you can tell with an HSG, or a hysterosalpingogram. The dye test can also give you that information. Now, there are some people who that band of muscle grows over time. So I have actually removed septums from people who I have been inside their uterus before with a hysteroscope and never saw anything that looked like a septum. And so it makes you scratch your head and say, where did that even come from? And you think, well, it may be a band of muscle that just kind of gets pushed down, and that there are other circumstances that contribute to that, like maybe something hormonally, or kind of different times during the cycle, it may appear differently. But that would be my guess, Shanna, as to how that would have gotten missed before, because somebody looked at it and thought it was more a bicornuate uterus than it was a septate uterus. And you really want to know, because if it's a bicornuate uterus that looks like this, and then you start sort of chipping away at this part, you're taking away good normal endometrium and good normal muscle that uterus needs to kind of help be able to hold a baby inside and ultimately to squeeze that baby out. So that's my hunch there. That's a really good question. Interesting. You, Nick, been seeing protocols lately with 2.5 to 5 milligrams of letrozole added to the Lupron. Yep, that is exactly right. 2.5 or 5 is either one is probably, I mean, honestly, I think 2.5 is probably plenty enough. I think if we were doing the Lupron in someone who was very heavy, who had a lot of those fat cells, more than average, I might be more inclined to increase the dose or to use letrozole when I might not otherwise in someone who is a bit leaner. A. Clark says 8 weeks and 2 days, heart rate is 184. Excellent. Everything I'm reading says that's high. At what point should we be concerned? Usually not. So, first of all, congratulations. That is awesome news. I'm really, really happy for you there. So typically, we usually see kind of 120 to 160. But just like you and me, we can have transient elevations of our heart rate, and so that may just be may have been a little high when you were listening to it. But you see, that made me yawn. I don't know why, but it's not a herald of anything bad. Now, I will say that babies can have arrhythmias just like we can. And babies with what we call tachyarrhythmias, meaning to say fast heart rates in pregnancy, in most cases, so usually we monitor those things during pregnancy, like during labor. Oftentimes that's sort of when you find them, or at an OB visit, somebody listens and they just keep hearing that a heartbeat is really, heart rate is really, really high. And then you go see the fetal cardiologist and they do a fetal echocardiogram. In most cases, these fetal tachyarrhythmias resolve spontaneously as soon as the baby starts breathing air from the outside, because that changes the whole circulatory system, and usually that typically resolves there really pretty quickly. I have never honestly seen a tachyarrhythmia, something that is an ongoing problem, present itself in the first trimester. So my guess is that's probably just a variation. So fingers crossed there for sure. Marlena says, oh, hi Noodles, by the way. Marlena says, if you can't visualize an ovary well during an egg retrieval, how do you get the eggs? And I will tell you, I've never met an ovary I couldn't get. I have no hesitation about. So normally when we retrieve eggs, we're doing it vaginally through a vaginal ultrasound, because the ovaries typically sit just to one side or the other of the vagina. So placing the ultrasound probe directly up against the vaginal wall means we can get to that ovary very easily. But there are some scenarios where the ovary is in a different place. Like maybe it's higher up. I have a very nice young lady I've been seeing recently who had several surgeries before, excuse me, in her intestines. And as a result of scar tissue or whatever, the ovary is now much higher, kind of much closer to her hip bone. If I can't see the ovary vaginally, first thing we do is we kind of push on the abdomen. We kind of push in order to see if that will cause the ovary to become easily visualized. But if not, I just do a retrieval through the abdomen. It is really just as easy. It means you have a little tiny needle poke in the abdomen. It can leave a little bruise. It may make you a little bit sore there for a couple of days, but no big deal really. So Marlena, there should not be a reason that an ovary gets left behind, because an abdominal retrieval in the right hands is every bit as easy as the standard vaginal retrieval. Shelby asks, is an HSG needed after a left salpingectomy and a right salpingostomy, or is a similar procedure done at the end of a laparoscopy? Well, so if what you're saying there is that the right tube has been removed, and then you had an ectopic on the other side, and they left the tube. They just cut into the tube and removed the pregnancy, and then we let that tube heal back up. You can't really assess a tube when you've done a salpingostomy because that means you've cut it open. So you can't push any fluid or anything through it because it's all just going to spill right out where you cut it open to remove the ectopic. Now, plenty of people have come to me and have said, well, but I had surgery for my ectopic and they told me that, they took the pregnancy out of it, but the tube looks just fine, is what they say. And I say, okay, but there was an ectopic pregnancy in that tube. There was a speed bump in that tube that stopped that pregnancy from being able to make its way back down to the uterine cavity. Did that speed bump grow all the way so that it blocked the tube so that sperm and egg couldn't get through it all? No, apparently not. It just created a speed bump. But so then we do something worse to it. We cut into it to take that pregnancy out. The speed bump's still there, but now we've also added scar tissue to that matter. So after having had an ectopic, your risk for a future ectopic is pretty substantial. And Shelby, if one of those ectopics, or if one of those was if the salpingectomy rather, was from an ectopic, and then they did a salpingostomy on the other side, the risk for, after two ectopics, the risk is extremely high for a further ectopic. And Shelby asked, well, what if it was a repair for a hydrosalpinx? Okay, so that's something that's a different scenario there. That's called a neosalpingostomy, making a new opening at the end of the tube. While that still does increase your risk, you are absolutely right. We would push some dye through there because we want to see that the tube itself is open. Now, the real question is, did it seal itself back up and create another hydrosalpinx? Because our bodies are really experts when it comes to healing. We want to heal, and you know what happens if you cut yourself on your arm before too long, that thing is healed up, and the same thing will happen for the fallopian tube, which is in a nice, warm, dark, moist, place inside the pelvis there. We try to open that up to create a new opening for the fallopian tube. But the real question is that opening going to work? And is that opening going to reseal? So is an HSG necessary? I would suggest, I think it is very reasonable to look and make sure that it didn't heal itself over and create a new hydrosalpinx, or that it didn't, start cause enough scar tissue that then it's just not working at all. Because you don't want to spend too much time doing treatment, if the treatment's not going to work. So I think it's a reasonable thing to do. Yes, I do. Deba Villa Jones, it looks like. Miss you at the Miami office. Oh, my favorite doctor for so many years. Remember me? Yes, I do. Thank you for saying so. So you may know that my history is I spent 20 plus years in South Florida in Miami. I went from Miami to Colorado Springs, where I was for about 5 years, and now I am in Pensacola, and also do some work in St. Louis and in Tulsa as well. We also have offices, I mentioned, in Panama City and in Mobile. So we are happy to help you. If you need help, you just pick up the phone and call us. My website at New Life Fertility is fertilityleaders.com, and that at the MCRM, the Missouri Center for Reproductive Medicine. Take a look at us in either spot there. We see people from all over the map. We can consult with you by video. Makes it very, very easy. Happy to help if we can. Easy says, oh, just excited to tune in today. Thank you. I appreciate you being there. Oh my gosh, the Cockatoo and Bassett from Key Largo are actually on the program. If you're still there, it's great to see you, and I miss you guys very, very much. The Styles family says, how long do you take Omnitrope before your transfer? I typically do that for 21 days before transfer. I use Omnitrope before retrieval for 21 days before stem start, and then as long as you are doing your stem up to the day of trigger, unless you run out first. That's when I use Omnitrope. I do not use growth hormone for embryo transfer. I have not seen any convincing data that it's helpful, but it is, however, very expensive. Right. Tanya or Tara, I said Tanya, sorry. Ooh, Tara, I hope you're still there. It's great to see you. Oh, and Timmy, glad to have you here as well. Let's see, back to DNA fragmentation. Can't they see DNA fragmentation only when you test it? That's right. Yeah, you can't actually see DNA fragmentation. You have to be able to test for it, but presumably those fragmented DNA either won't look normal or won't perform normally. So that when we are doing ICSI or selecting a sperm for an egg, when you run them through that obstacle course, you're able to select from a pool of better sperm, theoretically, the more normal sperm. And then you're putting them inside the egg anyway. So yeah, that's kind of how that works. Good question there. And can ICSI sometimes damage the egg? Only if the egg is very, very fragile. Like if the egg quality is very low and the egg itself is just kind of coming apart anyway, then theoretically, ICSI can damage the egg. But in that scenario, really theoretically, the sperm is probably not going to be able to fertilize it. I have not seen eggs do any better in conventional IVF in that scenario. Let's see. Hi, Zenny. Thank you for being here. Let's see. Malane, I believe that says I'm about to do an FED and I'm FET and I'm scared my body isn't ready. My friend, your body knows how to be pregnant. It does. You just have to let it do its thing and trust in the process, because this is something that we've been doing for decades and we really know how to get there. So trust in the process and fingers crossed. We are going to be out of time tonight, folks. If I was not able to get to your question, please email it to me, and that's askfertilitywithfink@firstfertility.com. You know, the whole doggone fertility roller coaster is not the book of your life. It is just a chapter. And all we're doing here is trying to rewrite that chapter together. So let's do that, huh? Every step forward with love, every step forward with kindness. Not enough kindness in the world. And most importantly, every step forward with hope. Because tomorrow is a new day and it's full of all new adventures. So let's seize them together, friends. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Happy St. Patty's Day. Happy spring break. And until next time, I'm Dr. Randy Fink. Good night.